The discovery happened on a humid afternoon in late April, when the plantation fields were still wet from several days of relentless rain. Most of the workers had been sent to repair sections of fencing damaged by the storms, while others cleared fallen branches from the neglected edges of the property. Near the northern boundary of the estate stood a stretch of land that had remained untouched for years. Thick brush, twisted vines, and towering cypress trees formed a natural barrier that few people willingly crossed. Local laborers avoided the area whenever possible, claiming the ground felt wrong beneath their feet and that strange sounds could sometimes be heard drifting through the trees after dark. One worker named Isaiah found himself assigned to clear part of the overgrowth. Armed with little more than a rusted machete, he spent hours cutting through dense vegetation. The deeper he moved into the wilderness, the quieter everything became. Birds that had filled the morning with song seemed absent. Even the insects appeared strangely silent. The only sound was the steady chopping of steel against tangled vines. Then his blade struck something solid. At first, he assumed it was a tree root buried beneath the soil. Kneeling down, he pushed away layers of wet leaves and mud. What emerged was not wood but weathered stone. Curious, Isaiah continued digging with his hands. Soon he uncovered the corner of a rectangular slab hidden beneath decades of earth and plant growth. The stone bore no name. No date. No inscription of any kind. Its surface was smooth except for a symbol carved near the center. Time had worn away much of the design, but enough remained to reveal a shape unlike anything Isaiah had seen before. It resembled a twisted flower enclosed within a circle. Word of the discovery spread across the plantation before sunset. Workers abandoned their tasks and gathered around the site. Some stared in fascination while others refused to come near. Several older laborers exchanged uneasy looks the moment they saw the symbol. One man crossed himself repeatedly before walking away without explanation. By evening, stories began circulating among the workers' quarters. Elderly residents spoke in whispers about rumors passed down from previous generations. They recalled tales of a woman who had once lived on the plantation under mysterious circumstances. According to the stories, something terrible had happened to her, though no one seemed willing to explain exactly what. Every version ended the same way: her name was never spoken aloud. The courthouse in rural Louisiana had seen its share of violence, disputes, and bitter accusations since the end of the Civil War, but on that particular morning, the atmosphere felt unusually tense. Every bench was occupied. Farmers, merchants, former soldiers, and curious townspeople crowded into the room, eager to witness the murder trial that had become the subject of endless speculation. The victim had been a respected businessman whose death remained shrouded in unanswered questions, and with each day of testimony, the case seemed to grow more complicated. The proceedings had dragged on for hours when the prosecution called an elderly witness named Elijah Turner. At nearly 70 years old, Elijah moved slowly, leaning heavily on a wooden cane polished smooth by years of use. Many people in the courtroom recognized him. He had spent most of his life on the nearby plantation and was considered one of the last surviving individuals who remembered its darkest years. At first, his testimony appeared routine. He answered questions carefully, speaking in a low voice that occasionally forced the judge to ask him to repeat himself. He described the plantation as it had existed decades earlier, mentioning former owners, workers, and events connected to the property. The spectators listened politely but showed little interest. Then one of the attorneys presented him with a weathered document recovered during the investigation. Elijah studied the paper for several long moments. His hands began to tremble. The color drained from his face. A silence settled across the courtroom as everyone watched him stare at a single line written near the bottom of the page. The attorney asked whether he recognized the name listed there. For several seconds, Elijah said nothing. The judge repeated the question. Finally, the old man lifted his eyes from the document and looked around the room. His expression carried a mixture of fear and resignation, as though he understood the consequences of what he was about to do. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Yet every person in the courtroom heard it. He uttered the name of the woman whose existence had long been erased from local memory. The reaction was immediate. Several spectators gasped. One juror visibly recoiled. An elderly woman in the gallery covered her mouth and began crying. Even individuals who claimed never to have heard the name before appeared unsettled by it. Whispers spread rapidly through the room as forgotten stories resurfaced in frightened minds. The trial had suddenly become something far larger than a single murder investigation, and for the first time in nearly 20 years, a secret buried beneath fear and silence had begun to emerge. The courtroom remained unsettled long after Elijah Turner spoke the forbidden name. What had begun as a straightforward murder trial was quickly transforming into something far more disturbing. Reporters from neighboring parishes arrived to cover the proceedings, sensing that the case concealed secrets reaching far beyond the death under investigation. As public interest grew, attorneys intensified their search for evidence connected to the plantation's past. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. While cataloging old property records stored in a deteriorating county archive, a clerk discovered a dust-covered wooden chest hidden behind stacks of abandoned documents. The chest appeared untouched for decades. Its lock had rusted shut, forcing officials to pry it open. Inside lay a collection of yellowed papers, receipts, correspondence, and a large leather-bound ledger whose pages had darkened with age. The ledger immediately attracted attention. Unlike ordinary plantation records, its entries were unusually detailed. Every payment, transaction, and visitor had been carefully documented. Names appeared alongside dates, amounts of money, and cryptic notes written in hurried handwriting. Investigators brought the book to court, where experts began examining its contents. At first, the entries seemed routine. They listed livestock purchases, equipment repairs, and wages paid to workers. But deeper into the ledger, strange patterns emerged. Large sums of money had been distributed to individuals whose identities could not be verified. Several names appeared repeatedly before vanishing without explanation. Certain pages contained coded remarks written in the margins, as though the author feared someone else might someday read them. The most alarming discovery involved a series of entries connected to the woman whose name Elijah had spoken. Her name appeared dozens of times. Each mention was followed by unusual payments made to influential figures throughout the parish. Judges, businessmen, local officials, and plantation owners all seemed linked through a network of transactions that stretched across many years. Some entries were accompanied by symbols matching the one found on the unmarked grave hidden within the overgrown section of the plantation. As investigators continued reviewing the ledger, they uncovered references to several individuals who had supposedly left the region but were never documented arriving elsewhere. Their disappearances coincided with substantial payments recorded shortly afterward. The dates formed a troubling pattern that was impossible to ignore. When portions of the ledger were read aloud in court, spectators listened in stunned silence. What appeared to be an ordinary record book was beginning to reveal evidence of a coordinated effort involving powerful members of the community. Each page exposed new connections, new disappearances, and new reasons why generations of residents had chosen to remain silent about the woman whose name had nearly been erased from history. As the contents of the plantation ledger became public, the focus of the trial shifted dramatically. The courtroom was no longer concerned solely with the recent murder that had brought everyone together. Investigators now found themselves examining events that stretched back more than 2 decades. What initially appeared to be scattered incidents began forming a pattern so disturbing that even seasoned lawmen struggled to explain it. The first connection emerged when officials compared names from the ledger with old parish death records. Several individuals listed in the plantation accounts had died under circumstances considered unusual at the time. One man had supposedly drowned in a shallow creek despite being known as an excellent swimmer. Another was found dead in his barn after what was ruled an accident involving farm equipment. A third had vanished entirely, with local authorities concluding that he had simply abandoned the area. Individually, the cases attracted little attention. Together, they painted a far different picture. The dates associated with these deaths often appeared alongside strange notations in the ledger. Certain symbols recurred with alarming frequency. Investigators discovered that many of the deceased had either worked on the plantation, conducted business with its owners, or possessed information that could have exposed activities taking place behind closed doors. As witnesses were called to testify, more details surfaced. Elderly residents recalled hearing rumors about disappearances that were never properly investigated. Families spoke of relatives who had suddenly left town without warning, despite leaving behind property, possessions, and loved ones. Some described receiving anonymous threats after asking too many questions. The trial became increasingly tense with each revelation. Then came the testimony of a former deputy who had served the parish years earlier. He admitted that several suspicious deaths had troubled him at the time but claimed he had been pressured by influential community leaders to close investigations prematurely. According to his account, certain cases were considered too sensitive to pursue. His testimony sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Reporters filled pages of notes as attorneys presented evidence linking multiple deaths to individuals named in the ledger. The growing list of victims stretched across years and involved people from different backgrounds, occupations, and social classes. Yet nearly all shared one common connection: each possessed knowledge related to the mysterious woman whose name had remained forbidden for so long. What began as a murder trial was now exposing the possibility that an organized conspiracy had operated in the shadows for decades. The evidence suggested that silence had not been maintained through superstition alone. It had been enforced through fear, intimidation, and a series of deaths that many were beginning to believe had never been accidents at all. By the time the trial entered its final stage, the atmosphere inside the courthouse had become almost unbearable. What had started as an investigation into a single murder had unraveled years of deception, corruption, and carefully buried secrets. Every new witness seemed to expose another layer of the plantation's hidden history. The public had become obsessed with one question above all others: who was the woman whose name had inspired such fear for nearly 20 years? The answer finally emerged through a combination of testimony, recovered documents, and a series of personal letters discovered among the belongings of a deceased plantation owner. Unlike the ledger, which concealed much of its meaning behind codes and symbols, the letters were direct. They described a young woman named Clara Beaumont, a house servant whose intelligence and courage had made her both respected and feared by those around her. According to the evidence, Clara had witnessed activities occurring on the plantation that powerful individuals desperately wanted to keep hidden. She had learned of illegal land deals, fraudulent financial arrangements, and acts of violence committed against workers who threatened to expose corruption. More importantly, she had gathered proof. The letters revealed that Clara intended to take her evidence to state authorities. Before she could do so, she disappeared. For years, local legends transformed her into something else entirely. Some claimed she had become a ghost haunting the plantation grounds. Others insisted she practiced dark rituals or possessed supernatural abilities. The stories grew more elaborate with each passing year, turning her into a figure of fear rather than a victim. The truth was far more horrifying. Witness testimony established that several influential men had conspired to silence Clara before she could reveal what she knew. They arranged her murder and secretly buried her in the isolated section of the plantation where the unmarked grave would remain hidden for decades. The strange stories surrounding her name had not developed naturally. They had been deliberately encouraged to discourage questions and keep future generations away from the truth. As the final evidence was presented, many spectators sat in stunned silence. The woman whose name had terrified an entire community was not a monster, a witch, or a restless spirit. She was a young woman who had uncovered a criminal conspiracy and paid for that knowledge with her life. The fear that lingered around her name had never been fear of her.